Hey, Julie, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. So this is kind of an exciting day for us. Today is what is today? Today is Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. Also Pi Day, right?
Pi Day, of course. The
Right.
high holy day of my year.
Of course.
Because of the pastry, not because of math.
No, yeah, of course. Pastry over math every single day.
I don't do
But
math.
we're here to talk about collaborations for authors. So instead of just doing like, yeah, let's just launch a book, etc. Why don't we talk about how we made the book? I figured that would be a better way of approaching the whole topic. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. Cool. So maybe I think I need to start just do a bit of a background on how our collaboration it first started. Or should we go back to the friendship? I don't know where to start. Do we have an outline? I don't. I didn't put an agenda together here.
Well, uh, interestingly, I would say once we start talking about collaboration, that our professional collaboration would not exist without the friendship. That's me personally, and that's
Okay.
something we can talk about because I'm sure a lot of people can do it otherwise. I could not. So
Okay.
maybe we should start with the friendship.
Yeah. So we met at the very first writers conference we met at was in Austin
Mhm.
in, oh boy, when was that? 2012, 13,
No, no, 15, right?
15
Some
was it?
thereabouts. 14?
Okay. All right. Sometime around there, I guess.
Yeah. I told you I don't do math. Come on.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're not going to do math. We're not going to do math. But we met at a writers conference, and then we re-met at other writer conferences over the
Yeah.
years, and that sort of solidified the friendship, right?
Yes, absolutely. And also, I was emailing you at the time you were working for Kobo. So I was constantly emailing you with questions, and you were always very generous with professional advice. As everyone knows, you always are very generous with professional advice and mentorship. So we sort of had like an email friendship, and then we met up again in San Diego, and yeah.
Yeah, San Diego, California, a whole bunch of different guys, Austin
Yeah.
as well, and so we had this existing friendship, but we had never written together because I kind of tend to write on the spookier side of things, true ghost stories, horror, thrillers, urban fantasy. And what's your cup of tea when it comes to writing?
My cup of tea is not that. My cup In fact, that's one thing I always tell people is like, it's so funny because before we wrote together, every time you wrote a book, I always bought it and I'd go, "Oh, I'm so excited I got your book." And you'd always tell me, "You're not allowed to read that." So I would always read to the scary parts and then I would skip those pages. But my cup of tea is romance and women's fiction and literary fiction and historical fiction,
Okay.
around that section, those sections of the bookstore.
So I guess the first question that we sort of have for one another in this dual interview here is why the heck did we decide to write a novel together of all things? What was what prompted that?
What prompted that? Well, I think you have to, since it's your series, it starts with you. It was always my secret dream, and I didn't tell you this after we finished Lover's Moon, but I always used to say to my family, someday I hope I get to co-write with Mark. But like I couldn't really. I thought of several nonfiction things we could do together, and at one point I think I told you we should maybe do an editing book together, or something like that. But I could never have fathomed that there was fiction that we could do together until
Yeah,
you had an idea.
and that was interesting. So what had happened is, so I have a series, a Canadian werewolf series. Started off with a Canadian werewolf in New York, which I had no idea was going to be a series. It was originally a short story that got turned into a standalone novel, which is basically day in the life of a guy who happens to turn into a wolf during the full moon, and how does he live with the side effects of being the human. I didn't want to show the monster. I wanted to deal with the side effects because I thought it would be humorous. You wake up naked in Battery Park, a bullet hole in your leg, tasty human blood in your mouth, no memory of the night before. What the heck did I get into? That kind of stuff. So I thought I saw dark humor as a possibility. I did the novel, and it wasn't until, and that first came out in 2016. It wasn't until 2020 that I'd been prompted by some editors for an anthology, called Monster Road Trip. And I thought, well, what if I stuck Michael on a train and he's bound for Stowe, Vermont, and he's going to turn into a wolf before he gets to the destination? That would be funny and stressful. And that kicked off me wanting to write more in the series. And so what had happened is I should go back a little bit. In A Canadian Werewolf in New York, which kind of takes place from sunrise till the end. Um, he's in the midst of a day where he's getting sidetracked with everything. He comes back to his apartment. He lives at the Algonquin Hotel in Manhattan, a literary hotel, because he's a writer and that was sort of a dream of his. So he's got like a permanent residence there. And his ex-girlfriend, the only woman he has ever loved and still pines for to this day, shows up after years of them. They were together very briefly. They broke up because, well, he didn't tell her about his secret. He was lying to her. She thought he was having an affair. They ended up breaking up. But she's back in his life and he's all excited, thinking, "Oh my God, she's back for me." And then he sees the engagement ring on her finger, and she says, "Andrews, I know you're a wolf. I need your help. My fiance is missing, and I know you can sense him and stuff like that." And that sort of kicks off one of the plots in A Canadian Werewolf in New York. And from that point on, there was always this thing between Gail and Michael, but it was never realized, right? There was this interest where Michael was still madly in love with Gail. Gail was just not ready to have a relationship with someone who had lied to her. And off you go. But they're still friends. So they kind of fight the bad guys side by side. Gail owns an occult shop in Manhattan, and that's how they first met, because he needed research, because he's a mystery writer and he needed to learn about the Necronomicon and all kinds of stuff that she would have known with her profession. I had readers say they would love to have seen the story of the backstory of Michael and Gail. So I went in and I thought, okay, cool. What I'll do is I'll do this extra bonus content. It'll be like a short story, maybe a long short story, maybe a novella, novelette, but I'll do it as a romance. So I went out and I bought Gwen Hady's Romancing the Beat. I think you might have been one of the people who recommended that to me. Read it, thought it was fantastic. We pulled out the worksheet, started playing with it, the outline. This is where we're going to get into some of my lack of some of my abilities. Started to outline the idea, and then I wrote the first chapter from Michael's point of view, the day they met, and then Gail's point of view. And I ran into problems. I, like Michael, was infatuated with Gail. I loved her so dearly, put her on a pedestal. I couldn't write her point of view because she was the perfect woman. Like, Gail was the perfect woman. I was basically just, taking everything I loved about Liz, for example, and just throwing that into the Gail character. And so I had trouble because Gail was such a powerful figure to me. And I realized I couldn't write it. And I tried for a good year. I had this on the back burner. And then I think I came knocking at your door on my knees, begging, "Would you please consider writing in this universe with me?" The genre you're not familiar with, but it's going to be romance. We have to follow all the tropes. And instead of slamming the door in my face,
I think initially I did. I think initially I said, absolutely not. I'm not qualified for that. Like, I don't know what werewolves even do. I don't know anything about how to talk to people about werewolves. And what convinced me was you said, "You're not," because at that point in the story, Gail didn't know anything. So I was just writing a straight up romance. And you were writing a guy who's sneaking around his werewolf stuff. So
that's true.
It really was staying very much in my lane at that point. I was still very much in my lane of just, this is just a woman living her life, writing a romance. So once I got over that hurdle of, I'm not really jumping into a genre I don't know about, it was kind of a no-brainer of a decision, a chance to work with you and be able to do something that I already know how to do, but sort of venture into something else. Like, yeah, easy. Of course I want to do that.
So it feels like I tricked you into this with a gateway drug, right? It was kind of it's like, "Here, Julie, let's come into this universe with a romance." And let's
That is 100% accurate. I was definitely coerced.
So I think one of the other things before we get into some of the logistics of how we collaborated, but I think initially I was like, "Oh no, Julie, it's gonna be a really long short story. It's gonna be a novella. It won't take that much time. It'll be
Yeah,
this thing." And I seem to remember getting to a point. Now it's a shorter novel. I think it's only what 65,000 words, right?
yeah,
So it's not as
thereabouts,
long
yeah.
as. I mean, Stowaway is way shorter, and it was meant to be a long short story. Um, but I think we were about halfway through it, and we realized this was going to be more than 20,000 words. This is.
Yeah.
I think once we hit 35,000 words, we're like, yeah, maybe this is going to be a book.
Yeah, we need to go ahead and commit already because we're not even close to being finished with this one yet. Yeah.
So I want to go back to how did we, and just for anyone who's checking this out and is not familiar with it, this I'm just going to pop up Lover's Moon on the screen. So this is, and if I take the banner off, we'll actually be able to see your name. So yeah, so this is Lover's Moon, which again, Juan Pedron, who is my cover designer. Initially, I'd had him design a cover. Oh yeah, that's the other thing too, is I had a cover with a different Gale,
That's right.
and that was also part of the collaboration, so we can come to that. And I didn't load it, but that's the book that came out. But I guess the process of, I'm trying to remember how we decided we were going to go about this, because I think I sent you what I wrote. I think I sent
Mhm.
you the first couple chapters and said, this isn't set in stone, let's see what we can do. And I showed you the really crappy attempt at an outline, because I had this spreadsheet online following Gwen's, all the tropes and the stages.
Yes,
And I
right.
think I had, I don't know, 10% of it filled out, maybe.
Maybe a little more, but we definitely worked together on that of when things need to happen and why. And obviously we're writers, we can do what we want, but romance readers definitely it was a balancing act, wasn't it? Because romance readers expect certain steps
Yeah.
and we wanted to hit those, but also your audience is not necessarily a romance audience, so we didn't want to alienate your audience. So I mean, that was really the start of where we had to really learn to negotiate, because I would frequently go, nope, in romance we have to have this happening by now. And you would
Yes.
go, okay, but my urban fantasy readers need to see something else here. And so we would have to walk that fine line of how are we going to make both sets of readers happy. And also both of us go a little bit out of our comfort zones into, just because it's not just because it's a romance story we're telling, I had to be willing to veer into, we're not necessarily going to be super strict with the tropes here. And then you had to do the same thing where I was saying things to you like, we have got to have these two make out pretty soon.
Yeah, that's right.
Like there better be a bubble bath somewhere. And we just had to like learn to trust each other with our strengths.
And that was an interesting thing, because in the novel A Canadian Werewolf in New York, I had Michael have a bit of a flashback memory, and we'll get into
Yeah.
me doing a lot of that sort of him in his own head.
Yeah.
Um, one of my habits. But I had stated things that had happened on their first date,
Yeah.
how many dates they'd had before their first kiss, and all of that stuff. And I'd even stated how they broke up. So we had to tell
Right.
the story before they broke up, right? Because it had to be a classic love story. It had to be classic romance,
Right.
happily ever
HEA.
after. Well,
Happily ever
happily
after.
ever after in this moment in time.
Yeah. Right.
And so we still had those, like I could have gone and George Lucased it, right? I could have gone and changed it so that Han didn't shoot first and stuff like that, right? But
Yeah.
I didn't want to. I wanted to be true to whatever was going on in my head way back when I was writing it. So
Yeah.
we were kind of stuck, right, in terms of where they met, the first date, second date, the fact that they
Yeah.
talked all night, and all these things. And then you introduced some really interesting characters that I had not been expecting. I didn't know Gail had a brother.
Mhm.
We didn't know that they were twins
Yeah.
until I think the second book we wrote together,
Yeah.
right? Because
That's
it
right.
never came up. But her best friend, Isabel.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about the introduction so what, and there's value, right? Because in the romance, I think they have to have someone to talk to, right? Like a
Yes.
buddy.
And And also, since I have read all of your Canadian werewolf books, I knew that what Gail was missing was an inner life, which made sense because everything was told from Michael's point of view. So my thought process was, if we're getting Gail's point of view, A, she needs flaws, which she had none. And B, obviously she's going to have family, she's going to have friends. And Isabeau is so much fun to write, who is her business partner and her best friend. And come to find out, a lot more is going on, but you have to read Hex and the City to find that out. I don't want to get too spoilery here, but I just wanted her to have depth and complication. And
Right.
I felt so lucky that you let me do that with Gail, given what you had set up
Right.
with Michael's opinion of her as sort of flawless, which is cool, if we're sticking with Michael's opinion throughout the series, that's cool. But if we're going into her point of view, I wasn't sure that would be entirely as interesting. We can't
Right.
have a woman walking around, or any character walking around going, I'm really the greatest. There's nothing wrong with me here. That's not an interesting book.
Yeah.
Michael is very open about his flaws and his concerns and his worries and these things. And so, she deserves, I thought, that much depth to her.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing that happened, it's in the writing of Lover's Moon, which is meant to be sort of a standalone flashback
Right.
love story. And while we were writing it, we did a lot more universe building together. Like, we brainstormed like maniacs, right? Like,
Right.
there was even before I asked you to co-author, I think, I was consulting with you to get your developmental editor thoughts and opinions on
Yeah.
stuff. So you had already been privy to some of the stuff I was thinking about doing. And that's when I think I tricked you into the co-authoring. But
You
we
did trick me.
created
Yeah.
backstory stuff
Yeah.
for Gail
Yeah.
that we didn't. Well, we hint at in Lover's Moon, but we didn't. We don't reveal it until Hex and the City, because again, we wanted to keep that as a standalone romance. But for the for the long, and each book can be read standalone, but
Mhm.
for the long time listeners and readers, because it's audiobooks too, they can appreciate some of the changes and nuances as the characters grow over time. And I think that was really intriguing because I was already excited. I already had the pre-order up for the next book in the series. I had my cover designer make, the cover design for Hex and the City, and it had only had my name on it.
Mhm.
And then I ran into the same issue, and I was like, so I can't tell this story without having a Michael story and a Gale story. And when I have a Gale story, there's someone I know who can really write her point of view really well.
And that was so fun because a lot of the stuff that we did in Lover's Moon, we were always doing with this intention that you, for your future with the series, a lot
Yeah,
of times I would say, I'm going to have her doing this, and maybe in the future you could have this come of it, or this. And like, we were always thinking the future of you writing the series and setting up options,
yeah.
because you're not big on
Planning.
creating a master plan. Well, it's not your favorite thing, but it was really fun to write out Lover's Moon with this idea of, well, Mark could take this in several different directions, this one little seed we're putting here, which was always initially our goal, was to give you a whole bunch of options to keep going on.
Right.
And then see, you keep saying you tricked me, but really I just wormed my way into it.
Ah, yeah. So
Because I'm the master planner here.
let's go back to the outline. So we actually outlined Lover's Moon.
Yes.
And I, except for some nonfiction books where I usually have an outline of what I know needs to go in different places,
Yeah.
with fiction, I don't. I have some milestones that I know need to happen, and I kind of know the ending sometimes, and I just kind of write into the dark, and I do that. But we outline. Well, actually, I remember giving you. So we used technically. Initially, it was a spreadsheet. I had an Excel spreadsheet because it was just me. But now I bring in a co-author.
Yeah.
Oh, how are we going to share this? You're in California. I'm in Ontario, Canada. uh-oh, how do we do this? 3-hour different time zone. So I want to get into some of the logistics of that. So it was a spreadsheet, and so we
Mhm.
turned it into a Google Doc, so
Mhm.
we could easily access that. And that way we could both edit and see each other's edits and make comments and stuff like that. And we still have it to this day. And of course, I forgot to grab screenshots of that to show people. But we had the outline following Gwen's template, right?
Right.
You'd put in details like this happens, this happens, this happens, and we even had little date things, because you got to
Right.
remember, I get really, even though I don't plan and plot, I get really anal about timelines, because you
Yeah.
can't be a werewolf in a city like Manhattan without really knowing when sunrise and sunset is, when the full moon is. You got an
Yeah.
app on your phone to track these things, because it's very important that you're not caught unawares.
Yes.
Because remember, we both watched the series Wolf Like Me recently.
Yes.
And one of the
Right.
things I loved about that series, no spoilers, but the one character who well, she's a wolf. It's obvious in the setup. But the one character is out on a date with, and she loses track of time because they're in a basement bar. And so
Right.
she doesn't realize, and they realize, oh my God, we've been here all afternoon. It's 6:30, and she has to runs across town to try to get home before she turns.
Yeah. And I
and
was
and
like,
that's
"Oh,
the
Mark's right about that."
that's the humor aspect. Well, not the
Yeah.
humor, but that's part of it. Oh, is like, oh, we can't. I have to cancel our date because I'm going to go be a hairy beast howling at the moon. I can't tell you that because you would not believe me, would you?
Yeah.
If I
Right.
told you.
Right.
So the outline had the date, and it had the those moments, right? Those tropey moments that are very critical in a first kiss and all of those things, and then even the tri-fail stuff too,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
We
Where
had
where
all
they
of those
had
things
to,
built in. Mhm.
the misunderstanding, I always called I go back to my earliest television programs, the Three's Company, the misunderstanding. Right.
Yeah, this one, which can feel very, to me, just as a reader, those can feel really false to me a lot of times, where I'm never a big fan of the romances where literally one conversation could solve everything. That's one of the things that was
Yeah.
so exciting about this book was this is so much bigger than one conversation. This is a conversation where it, probably the other person's going to lock you up if you say it out loud. Oh, by the way, I disappear 1 week a month because I'm a werewolf. The other person's going to go, yeah, that's not something we're going to negotiate. That's insanity. So it was fun to have a miscommunication trope without it seeming just, come on, you guys, just grow up and just say out loud the
Yeah.
facts of it. Sometimes you read those books and you get a little like, but this one was a really great challenge because the miscommunication was a very serious thing.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And then the other thing that we had is, so we had the tropes, we had the tri-fails, we had all the things that we had to have. The process of writing it was so different for me because
Yeah.
I write to deadline. So if I'm working with a traditional publisher, I got to get the manuscript into my editor by this date. When I'm self-publishing, editor deadline to get it to the editor so I can hit the pre-order, because I always put them up,
Yeah.
right? Which that's not something you do. I'm like, yeah,
No.
let's just put up a pre-order, right? um, and so we ended up. Well, you came up with a schedule, right? And you handwrite stuff, right? Calendar wise.
Yes, I do. I keep a paper calendar. I'm old school. Yeah.
So what you did is you sent me, and this would have been in 2022, if I remember correctly, the dates for getting that first draft done. Did we start it in the fall of 2021, or when?
I think so, yeah. I think. I don't know. It's
But it
all
was
kind
pretty
of
it was pretty steady. It was almost like a 30-day period. So here's the thing that blew my mind. I write in the morning, right? I
Mhm.
get up in the morning, 5:30, feed the dogs, feed the cats, put on the coffee. I write for a couple hours. Then around the time I know Liz is getting up, I get her coffee ready for her so that she can get going. She gets ready for work, out the door, and then I sometimes write again. But my most creative time is when everyone else in the house is, well, except the animals, are
Mhm.
asleep.
Mhm.
And you write at night, right?
Yeah.
Or in the afternoon, right?
Yeah, evening, afternoon, evening, night, yeah. Takes me
So
a long time to get revved up during the day.
see, I'm like maybe because I'm coming out of dream state or whatever. So that writing process is really intriguing. So what happens was you came up with a schedule, and it was pretty much a solid 30-day first draft.
Mhm.
And so again, it was only what 30 some thousand words each. So it wasn't even a
Mhm.
NaNoWriMo, right? It was less words.
Right, right.
But it was like, so like let's say the first Mark is going to write chapter 1, and I'm going to give it to you on the end of the day, the first, right? Which my 9 o'clock at night is still your 6 p.m. So
Yes.
even if I'm late, you get that. And then you have the whole next day to write it and get it back to me. And
Yeah.
then the next, and again, I'm probably in bed by the time you're even sitting down to write.
Right.
So,
Right, but frequently I would get your next chapter, it would already be there when I sat down the next day. The timing just worked out beautifully. Actually, we had a funny moment. I don't even know if you remember this, but we did have a funny moment during the second book, Hex and the City, where I had to call you one morning, and it was early. It was like 6 o'clock my time, and it was
yeah.
totally unrelated to work. It was a personal thing that I had to call you about. And um we talked about the other thing, and then you started going, you know what I was thinking about the book, and you know what else, and you know what else I think we should do, and you were like, plot, 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 plot. And I was literally still in bed, and I was going, holy shit. And then I thought, oh, this is how he feels when I hammer him at 10 p.m. his time, because my energy's just kicking in, and I'm going, oh, Mark, guess what? You know what else we should do? And this, and you know what Gail should do? And you know what the background should be? And you're like, it's 10 p.m. You need to calm down. And I realized, like, of all the differences that we have, like the body clock difference, the time difference is big, and the body clock difference is huge.
Oh yeah, for sure. That is true. Because when I'm geared up and ready to go, or I'm ready to just go, now I need to settle down.
Yeah.
Liz and I are gonna puzzle or read
Yeah.
or just relax. You're like in full mode, like let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But that worked out.
Sorry.
No, but that worked out really well because of the time differences, because I'm also a procrastinator. So there were some days where I didn't get stuff done in the morning, right? Like, because I work part-time for Draft to Digital. So
Yeah.
stuff comes up and I have to deal with it, right? When it happens, right? It's not like a 9 to 5 kind of thing. It's so sometimes in the morning when I would be writing, something happened and I need to address it. I need to go deal with it. I need to handle some situations. It's usually author relation kind of stuff, and
Yeah. Right.
I missed my writing time, and then the day happened, and the day's usually too busy doing other things. So then I go, ooh, if I turn this in at 3 a.m. the next day, it's still midnight for Julie. I've still hit my deadline.
Still done
So
it. I would
there were
never
a few times I took advantage of that extra 3 hours
Yep. And
because
you had the weekends too, because you're willing to work weekends and I am not.
oh, that's right. So in your schedule, we tried to make it so that we usually had a day off on the weekends, but I would have, if there was a Saturday or a Sunday, I would start that day early just to keep us moving forward. And I admire that your conviction of no, weekend is family time. Now you know I work all the time, but I don't work all the time. Like, it's very
Yeah.
flexible. So for me, it's a different environment, because that's just the way that I think I work best.
Yeah.
Little bits of time here and there, not a full 8-hour day.
Yeah.
And so that worked out really, really well for me. But so during, and we're not going to get into personal matters, but during the writing of the first draft, both of us were dealing with issues in our personal lives that
Mhm.
required us to be away from our desks, that required us to be either on the road, at other places, and for some strange reason, we got it done.
What is that all about, do you reckon? We did it. I'm really
So
proud of us, to tell you the truth.
yeah, I'm very,
Sure.
very proud of us, and
Yeah.
and Vin, very excited. Excellent to see the stream. I'm glad you're here watching it live, and thank you. And I
Anytime.
just noticed when earlier Juliet Banks said such a great cover. Thank
Mm.
you, and all. and of course I'll pop that up. She was talking about the Lover's Moon cover as we're talking about that.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for the comments. So the other thing that happened with the writing, and this is an interesting thing that can happen, is I've read all your books. I love your stuff. I love your humor. That was the other thing, is deciding that I wanted to work with you. This is an important thing to remember. We had an established friendship.
Hmm.
We had established trust. We had established respect, right?
Yep.
I met your husband, think he's awesome. Like, we nerded out over Rush. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your son's a good friend of mine now because we get to hang out when I'm in Colorado Springs. Um,
Right.
and he's such a wonderful young man as well. But and even though you haven't met Liz, you guys act like you guys have been best friends
I
for
know she's that. We
years.
always say that she's my online best friend.
That's right. So it's really interesting that we have this solid friendship and
Yeah.
trust and respect, and and we knew each other's writing well enough that we knew that the other person had skill and talent that we could lean on, that we could admire, that we could respect. But still, here's something that happened. Even though we have all this going for us, every single time I turned in a chapter to you, I was thinking, oh, and I think we had to we would email each other and say, okay, here's chapter 8. It kind of is.
It's
It kind of sucks, and if you want me to rewrite it, I will. Right? It was kind of like this very apologetic.
yeah.
But every time you did that to me, I went, "Oh my god, this chapter was awesome! Oh, I just
Yeah.
knocked my socks off!" And because we knew what was going to happen, but we didn't know the details, right? Because you're
Yeah.
fleshing out the details, and I think we had to kind of chide ourselves and say, "No, enough. We got to stop with the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Stop with the fact that, because I mean, I was thinking like, well, this isn't my best work. I probably could do better, but I'm going to turn it in because the deadline's here." And we managed to come up with something we're both proud of, even though I think in the first draft, why do we do that to ourselves as writers?
I don't know. It's so we didn't do it as much as we were writing Hex, though. I don't know if you noticed that. I mean, we were terrible during Lover's Moon. Every single chapter, we both went, "Oh my god, this is the worst thing I've ever written. I know you're going to hate it." And in Hex, we did it a little bit, but not as much. And my thought on that is, by that point, we knew each other's process so well,
Right,
and I knew that I mean, I knew this during Lover's Moon, but I was sure of it during Hex, that if this is genuinely bad, you will tell me. And you're
right,
not gonna say it in a mean way, and you're not gonna be a jerk about it. You're just gonna go, "Hmm, let's try this instead," or
yeah,
"Why don't we think about this?" Or your criticisms were always kind and fair, and every time you had something that you wanted to change, every time I went, "Oh, of course, that's the right answer," which in my opinion is a great editing partner, is when they say it and it's like it illuminates something but hadn't really, uh, um, said out loud yet.
right,
It's like they say this thing and you would say things and it was like, "Of course I know. That's obviously the right answer. That is the correction." It felt right. It felt better. It felt like it served the work. So I think during Hex, we were not as self-critical
right.
as we were during Lover's Moon, and I think that's just from the experience of learning to trust each other as co-authors.
Yeah, and I think part of that learning. So Hex is a much longer novel. It's about 83,000 words or something like that,
Yeah,
and Hex took us a lot longer because we did have to put it aside every once in a while with other things that were going on,
yeah,
travel and other commitments and stuff like that that came up. But one of the things that I noticed about Hex is, so the process I followed is, when I got a chapter back from you, first thing I would do is read the chapter,
mhm,
make my comments and edits, and we used Word, so we were just using Word, and we were making the comments in line. So I got track changes, make changes, suggestions, put in comments, and sometimes it was ha ha ha, because there's a lot of humorous bits
yeah,
in both novels, but particularly in Hex and the City, it was like, because there's a lot more action and adventure. It was really cool. It's like, oh my god, that I love that. That's a great piece of humor or whatever. But we would edit each other's works, and then I would write my chapter,
yeah,
and then you would go back and do the same thing. But what I noticed is every time I got it back, I didn't just go back to the previous chapter. I went back to the beginning of the manuscript. So the whole process.
Yeah.
By the time we got to the end, and we did take a bit of a break, right? Because we want to have a sort of a Christmas break,
Right.
a few weeks off in December where we're not doing as much work on it. So we actually was kind of cool because we actually put it aside for a bit. And then when we both came back to it, we both were even more brutal with each other, right? Editing our own, no, and brutal in a positive way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that is not something I have done before, but it's something I want to do in the future, because that time, that 2 weeks away, which we did not intend, but few things were sort of falling apart and we kind of came to a mutual agreement. I said, like, I have to breathe. I'm not because of the book, because of life.
Yeah, yeah,
And coming back to it, for I think for both of us, was so good, because when you let your brain just simmer a little bit, then you come back to it with fresh eyes, and all of a sudden it's so clear what's really, really working. And
yeah.
it's also really clear, like, okay, we don't actually need this part. And we were both able to go in and go, we can get rid of that. And we're going to lean hard into this. And it was a good, I want to incorporate that into my writing process from now on, is maybe write a first draft,
Right.
ignore it for a month, just let my subconscious sort of deal with, I don't know if I'll be able to do this, but I will say that was a good lesson to learn, is that time away is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, it really worked out in a very positive fashion.
Mhm.
Um, in because I think by the time it got to our editor,
Yeah,
we had both been through it so many, and our editor did great stuff and
yeah,
found some things both of us missed in the many, many passes we took. Um, and I want to get into the difference in the way that we plotted out Lover's Moon, and that we didn't necessarily plot out Hex in the City and the fight we
mm,
got into. But first, there's just a quick question comment from Hey Valerie. So Valerie, Francis asked, did you set out guidelines for your writing partnership prior to starting to work together? So yeah, I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about contract.
well, I mean, the answer is yes in contracts and yes in friendships, because when we first talked, I was very blunt. I do not care about books as much as I care about our friendship.
Right.
And that's a big thing to say, because everybody knows how I feel about books.
You kind of like them a little.
They're kind of my thing. And it just was so important to me to say right off the bat, I'm not going to lose this friendship with you over anything,
Yeah.
you know, over, I'm just not. And so that was always my guidepost. Now, that being said, I am also a big, big believer in good fences make good neighbors, all those cliches, make the rules for war in times of peace, all that kind of stuff. So, in addition to just a mutual conversation of always put the friendship first, we also set up some really good contracts, and we're very conscious of the fact that this is a, I mean, it's a lifetime agreement, really. Our
Yeah.
books, our children will be dealing with our book estates long after we're gone, and we have to set up really, really good parameters for each other.
Yeah, and so we did have a contract. It's only what, a 3-page, two
Yeah.
3-page contract, very high level. And because it was in my universe, we agreed to a different sort of split where I was getting a little bit more.
Yep.
But then we also agreed that the costs we would invest would equal that,
Yep.
the same percentage. So if $100 is split 60/40, for example, that's for
Right.
the costs as well as for the way that the income would work. And then so the contract, and I think the contract has a clause at the last that talks about should one of the collaborators pass away,
Hmm.
that the option from whoever manages their estate, the other author has the option to kind of change their mind and
Yeah.
then back out,
Right.
or whatever, right? So it's kind of open. We're not locked into anything, but it allowed our heirs or whatever to continue on if they wanted to.
Right.
Um, Logistically, I have to say, so here's the challenge. I'm in Canada, you're in the US.
Hmm.
Mm. So when I get paid to publish this to different platforms, I get paid in American dollars that gets converted into Canadian. I lose money on the exchange rate. Bank of Canada always makes more than the actual exchange rate is, right? That's business.
Mhm.
And then when I had to take my shoes and socks off and do the calculations and figure out how much you're going to get, I got to convert it back to American to pay you.
Yeah.
So not only have I lost exchange rate money twice, but I've lost time and
Mhm.
effort and money. And I'm not good at the numbers, not math. Again, I'd rather have the pi, not
Hi. Yeah.
3.14, etc. That's my thing. So we use Draft to Digital's payment splitting, which is an
Mhm.
option. So for all the major platforms except Google Play, all the library systems, we publish through Draft to Digital. So that goes to Amazon, Kobo, Apple, Barnes& Noble, and now all the library systems, Vivlio, Tolino, whatever.
Yeah.
All I had to do was invite you to a collaboration, say, here's what you're getting for print and ebook, right? That's for the trade paperback and the ebook. And then every month, and you could even log into the dashboard and see what the sales are, which is great.
Mhm. Mhm.
You get paid directly. They send you a tax form,
Yep.
and I get paid, and they send me a tax form, and everything's good. Now, we did have to have a clause in the contract that said, we're going to publish it this way. The payment splitting is going to be this. This is how it's going to work. Here are the exceptions: Google Play, audiobook,
Mhm.
hardcover editions, which you can't currently do through Draft to Digital print. So I had to do hardcover editions a different way. I
Mhm.
think I used a combination of Ingram and Amazon Direct and direct sales, right? So, on my PayPal and PayHip is what I'm using right now, and delivery via book funnel. And
And
so what
also,
we
when you do a lot of
in
expo.
person,
Yeah.
yeah, in person signings and stuff like that. So we
Yeah.
had an agreement on how we would deal with those. Here's the other thing we did. Okay, here's a cool thing for co-authoring when you're not living in the same spot. We used Avery labels. They were
Yeah. Oh,
transparent, label envelope labels, but transparent labels. Julie signed a whole bunch of them because I do a lot of in-person signings, mailed them to me. And so
yeah.
when I'm at a book signing, I can go, do you want this signed? They go, would you like my co-author signature? She's in California. Which one would you like? This one. And you lay it in, you take it and lay it in the book, and you can't even tell, right? It's just right on
Yeah.
the title page. So that's a logistical thing that you can do. That way they can get both. Not as
Well,
fun as getting your signature in person, but it's like a book plate, but it looks like you signed the book.
because I don't know if you people watching know, but shipping books back and forth from America to Canada, as we have learned the hard way, is really expensive.
Oh, it's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
But we also had a clause. So back to the money, about the exchange, right?
Yeah.
Any of those, what we did is we agreed upon a time frame for the payment, and what
Mhm.
I did is I just sent, sort of like an invoice, basically a document that said, here are the sales between this date and this date in this format on this platform, etc. Here's what the money is. Here's the divided, and then I
Yeah.
paid that to you for my own taxes and accounting. I could track, yes, I got this money through the different sources, but this is how much of that money went to my co-author, and so it's all trackable, it's all there, and I
Yeah.
think it's really important to understand that, right?
Yes, for sure. For sure. And some of it we didn't anticipate. There were things we didn't plan on. We didn't talk about the cons that you do, all the author events that you do.
Right.
And it's honestly, I'm just such a fan of right when it comes up, let's deal with it right now so that we're not 20 years down the line screaming at each other.
Yeah.
As soon as it comes up, and it happens several times, we go, oh, we don't have a clause for that. Let's fix it now
Right.
so that we're not fixing it pissed off at each other.
Exactly. And then
That's my big goal.
speaking of pissed off at each other, so when we wrote
Oh my God,
Lover's Moon,
I
right?
can't believe you did this.
When we had Lover's Moon out there, it was romance, it was tropey. We had the full outline, everything. We were in your wheelhouse, so I was really
Yeah,
following your lead. But then
yeah,
when we went to do Hex and the City, that was urban fantasy, adventure, humorous, whatever. So it was back to my genre that you had
yeah.
never written in. So,
You can tell them about the P now, right?
well, no, we're not even gonna get into the P. I was
Oh,
just
that's
talking.
where I
Well,
thought you were
I was
going.
talking about plotter because you were
Okay.
adamant that we actually use plotter and outline, and I'm like, oh, plotter schmotter. We don't need another tool. We have an idea. We know how it's going to end, right?
Yeah,
We knew how it was going to end. right? We
Yes.
had this vision, right? We even had the soundtrack, the vision, like everything was there. We both understood how this was going to end. We just
Right.
had to get there. And I'm like, yay, that's the fun. Let's get there. And you insisted, and I went in kicking and screaming to Plotter, right? Plottr.
Yeah.
And then I drank your Kool-Aid. Now, again, I didn't, and again, even as we were writing the last 20,000 words, there were still sort of big bad, nasty fight with the big bad was all we had described that was,
Right.
and we had the plotter, we had the timelines for Michael, for Gail, for the moon, for Ben, right? For different things that were going on, and we had all these cool things, and there were several times where we had to go, no, we got to take this chapter and go. Oh my God, Plotter was so amazing.
I know,
To just
Mark,
go,
my palms are sweating hearing you talk about this. Like it was, oh, going in without a plot it was tough on me.
yeah, I can't imagine how you dared do that, but I think you trusted me
Yes.
that the plot would
100%.
come out probably by the time we were halfway through the book. Because I think the other thing too is sitting on it for a bit, right?
Yeah.
We and we had to make some change. Even the changes of the logistics of, because there's a bit of a mystery they have to solve. It changed several times, and I also want to get into. We're not going to get into the P yet, but the P is kind of a thing. That was a thing. That was almost like this just broke up this relationship, right? But when we go to, this is foreshadowing. You see,
Yes, that's right.
when we were working on the story, I am loosey goosey. You taught me how to use a great tool like Plotter, and I went in. I spent like several hours just going into Plotter and going, I got to put everything for the whole series in here. This is awesome. Like
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in, man. I love it. But then what happened was, even though I'm Lucy and I write into the dark and I don't really outline, I'm really, really anal about time and space and place and
Yes.
the time of the day and where it is and what happened and how they could logistically get from this point to that point. I've even asked people like, does this restaurant in New York where's the bathrooms? Is it downstairs in the back of the room? Are they ambidextrous? Is it, gender based? Like all these things, I need to know these things because it just makes more sense for me. And even in a magical world where there's paranormal abilities, I was pretty anal and adamant. And I was like, no, 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 Julie. So then I became very, very structured in that way, right?
Yes. One time you even dinged me on, I had gotten the elevator reader wrong. Like Gail is watching an elevator. She's standing on the bottom floor waiting for an elevator door to open, and she watched the hand go. And you wrote back, actually, in that hotel, the elevators don't work that way. And I was like, okay, okay, cool. And at the time, like, it's so funny how that we're anal about opposite things, because
Yeah, it's
I am
true.
100% willing to go, whatever. The elevator's just a dude telling her, who cares? And you're like, nope, that's not what the elevator in that hotel looks like. And you always caught me on the things that I'm sloppy on.
And so that was an interesting thing. I'm going to pop up this visual. This is a visual from Lover's Moon. So this is the Barnes Noble at 555. Oh my God, what's the street? It's a street in Manhattan.
Fifth Avenue, right?
And this is obviously a fake. They did not put Lover's Moon in the window. I photoshopped that in to make it look like it was zero. But that's where they had their first date. And that also is a scene in Hex and the City.
Mm-hmm.
And even I was going and double checking because you had Gail looking out the window and seeing something, and Michael was down on the street looking up, and it was like, and I'm kind of like looking for photos of the place to see, would that visual sightline work? Like that's how anal I am about stuff.
Yeah, which is great because that's where I'm, sloppy and careless. So it was excellent for me to be checked on it right off the bat, and not checked after, which is what usually happens to me. Is usually my editor will check me and go, actually, that's 20 miles. And it was great to have you the very next day going, that window does not work that way, or something like that. It was really, really good for me.
I think similarly, we had to pick an isolated place that they were going to have this thing go down.
Yes.
And the isolated place you picked was perfect. I loved it, except the subway was not subterranean, it was above ground, and we needed it to be where there were no witnesses.
Right.
and I spent hours researching a good spot to move it to. But it
Yeah.
was so cool because the dialogue you had was perfect for this beach area, and it was just everything was. I mean, and I hated doing this, but I was just like, no, I'm the old. And I learned this from Dean Koontz from one of his books on writing way back in the day. But it's kind of like, that one little detail about the gun.
It shows
you
up
know,
in
the one little detail about is going to throw people out of the story. So it's like anyone
yeah,
who lives in Manhattan
it's
knows
gonna
this.
know. Yeah.
And so I was really, really particular about some of those details. I mean, I open Google Maps and I walk down the street and I even go to the date because there's a scene that takes place near not Grand Central Terminal. It's near the Madison Square Gardens.
Mhm.
And I'm checking on Google Maps to see what buildings were there that year, that month, as opposed to now.
I mean, it's so smart and it's so easy to do in this age that we live in. There's really no excuse for my laziness when it comes to this because it's not like that information is hard to find.
Yeah.
It's right there for all of us.
Now, speaking of information there to find, here's something I do really painfully all the time. I over explain. I beat the dead horse with another dead horse. And Michael is in his own head, and someone described him in a review as the thinking man's werewolf because he spends a lot of time overthinking things.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff when you got the manuscript back to me that I'm like, oh yeah, I said that 16 times already.
And conversely, there were many, many times, I think almost every time, where I would send you a chapter and you would write back and go, I don't know you never mentioned this before. I don't know what you're talking about. So our motto this
You're
time
like,
was,
but I hinted at it. I'm like, oh,
I
I'm a
hinted at it.
guy. I saw it with man eyes.
Yeah, I'm not sure why you don't understand what I didn't say here. That doesn't make sense. So then our little mantra was that your writing style is anything worth saying is worth saying 3 times. And my mantra is anything worth saying, I'm not going to say it because the reader should be smart enough to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, you trust the reader so much. And I have no faith in them, apparently.
Listen, if they can't see in my head, that is not my problem.
And yet,
And
and
yet,
yet, there was a detail that I had to. We actually fought over this, and I thought for some reason you were conjuring Liz because there's an element from Fright Night's Big City
mhm,
where one of the characters, their urine has the ability to nullify magic and paranormal abilities.
right.
and and I thought it was funny. They called it Golden Charm, and they ended up using it on the bad guys.
Yep.
And the whole idea is it's meant to be funny,
Yep.
right? That their pee actually can cause this. Because remember, especially for wolves, strong sense of smell, and sometimes urine cannot be a pleasant. Sometimes urine cannot be a pleasant smell. It's most often never a pleasant smell. So I
Correct.
thought it would be funny that this would be a tool they would use. And because I had this in the universe and this existed, I had to have the character at least logically say, hey, why don't we use this? And you're like, no,
No.
absolutely no. Defecation or urination or any of this
Absolutely
lowbrow.
not. No. No. And I didn't know that was coming either. And so when I first read it, I was like, is he serious?
But the guy had to think about it, even though they didn't end up using it, but that
Yeah.
still had to come up because I knew there would be readers that would go, "What about the golden charm?" And you're
Yeah,
like, "No,
that's
don't use
right.
that term."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that was the
like
first
that was an argument.
it
Like
was a
that was a
yeah,
back and forth. Like, no, Julie, but I can't go back and George
yeah.
Lucas it and change everything. Like it already exists.
Yeah, it was a tough one. That was
Yeah.
the one time in the writing of this book where I walked out of this office at night and sat down to dinner with my family and went, "What do I do here? How hard do I dig in my heels on this one?" Because it felt I was so against it. And I also thought like ultimately it is your series. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
shared book, but it's your series. And we had set that agreement up.
Yeah.
of you do get final say, and that's fair. And
Yeah.
so I had to decide how stubborn I was going to be on that particular
Yeah.
one. And we did come to an agreement.
We did come to an agreement that I think we can both live with very
Totally.
well. Because
Yeah.
I remember doing the same thing and going to Liz and saying, "Oh, Julie's having an issue with it." And she's like, "Oh, that was the stupidest thing." I'm like, "What? Are you two talking? Are you in cahoots here?"
Yeah, she secretly asked me to, no, I'm just kidding. She didn't.
But I mean, obviously, my lowbrow humor was a little bit not appreciated. So, but again, the other thing too is there's certain things, and this is an important element for co-authoring, is like you mentioned earlier. This is like a long-term thing.
Yeah.
Your name is going to be associated with this other author. So if you have a moralistic issue with me and pee jokes, right? And you don't want to be associated with a guy who tells pee jokes, right? Like that's it could be something worse, but it could be something where you're like,
Sure.
oh my god, now I'm suddenly tied to this person, and now I'm going to be thought of as a whatever, right? That's something you got to remember. You got to think about that. And
Yeah,
and
but
you
you
did say
can't
that to me, and that maybe it's like I don't want my name on a book that has, use of
joke.
urine in this way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and again, I thought it would be a tri-fail that they would, right, and it wouldn't work for a certain reason. I had a logistical, magical universe reason for it not working,
Right.
but that whole thing I threw out,
Yeah.
and I
Thank
just
you.
had to mention it just to satisfy lifelong fans who go, well, what about this?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's a thing. We could never have anticipated that, right? Like,
no,
we
no,
do have those clauses in the contract if someone wants to back out. And you think those things are going to be like, if Mark falls and hits his head and all of a sudden is a racist, I'm going to back out of this agreement. We're not going to work together anymore.
yeah,
And you think in terms of big personality, things like that. And it never would have occurred to me, like, what if he makes a pee joke that I just think is crude? You can't put those kinds of things in contracts. And that's where, again, you know, the constant adjustment, the constant communication.
yeah,
I'm not comfortable with this. Here's why.
yeah,
There are different ways. And you have to come into those conversations with, how about we try to get around it this way? How about you save it for the next book that you are writing on your own? How about you just do this line to make your other readers happy and also make my delicate sensibilities happy, because I am a delicate goddamn flower, Mark.
yeah.
Everybody knows that about me.
I have to pop up this comment from Ben. Every future co-writing contract Julie signs is going to include a provision for that, and her future co-authors are going to have a lot of questions.
Are you going to make pee jokes? Because if you're going to make pee jokes, I'm out. It's just, I didn't think I had to get it in writing, but now I know.
Oh my god, that was but again, like we ran into these, and I think because we had that foundation of friendship and trust,
Yeah.
and we knew each other's stuff, that we knew that there was going to be a way through it. We knew that there was going to be a way around it. And so I think the question of whether or not to write with someone, I think you have to have some sort of foundation, at least knowledge of their professionalism or something.
Yeah, and that was something I wanted to ask you, because you've co-authored a lot, and I would love to know what you think is, if a newbie author or someone who's never collaborated before came to you and said, should I collaborate with someone? What would your tip be? Because not everyone's as lucky as we are as to come into it
That's
with
true.
a foundation. And sometimes people just want to work with each other on a professional level, but don't necessarily have anything to fall back on. I think the fallback to me is the most important part of it.
Yeah.
But there are other people out there who just like this writer and want to work with him and don't care if he's a jerk. They just want his name on their book or whatever.
Right.
So what would you say if someone came to you, having been through it with several different people and several
Mhm.
different personalities? What's your tip?
Honestly, follow your gut. I mean, so I'll be honest with you. I mean, one of my very first co-authored books with a traditional publisher was the journalist who was interviewing me for an article about a previous book, and this was a nonfiction ghost story book. And she had never written a book in her life, but she was a journalist, And so I
Mm,
knew she knew deadlines, and I knew she
mhm.
knew this. The one thing, so and I thought, and I was also thinking this is a marketing decision. I'm like, hey, she works for a major newspaper in this city where it's going to be about this city. That's free advertising for us because she works for
Yeah,
the
that's
newspaper.
smart.
So I was thinking that, but I was thinking this is a professional journalist. I have read some of her nonfiction. I know she's good. She's interviewed me. She's a professional. I didn't know her. I mean, I knew her uncle. We went to school together.
Oh,
And
cool.
so we met Tim Hortons, very Canadian. We met for a coffee. We discussed it. We talked about some of the ideas, like, is there enough here for a book? And then I put the proposal together for the publisher. Now, the thing I didn't count on, she's a journalist. She's a professional writer. But journalists write really sparse and tight because they're really not selling articles. They're selling ads and stuff, right? So a chapter I think is 3,000, 5,000 words, and to her a chapter is 500 words to 1,000. So I
Mm.
ended up having to write 70% of the book because her we split it in half, but her chapters were a lot smaller, and I went, oh my god, the word count we promised the publisher. So I suddenly, and of course, fortunately, the research I did on UFOs, I thought there would be one chapter, but there were so many decades of information. I broke it into 3 different chapters of, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So fortunately, I ran into a different issue that compensated for it. But here I was thinking, oh, we're going to write 50% of the book. No, no, no. I ended up writing a lot more of the book, or having to go in and add and enhance stuff to the chapters because they just weren't long enough. Now, she's a great writer and her
Mhm.
research was fantastic, but I hadn't anticipated that. So I am co authoring with an author who has not yet published a book before. But my gut instinct about who they are, what they're capable of, their passion and their commitment give me a really good feeling. And I know this is a weird thing to do, but yeah, I've agreed to co-author with them. Again, I don't have anything other than, having read really short bits of things, but having sat down with them, having, broken bread with them, having even sat there with a whole bunch of books in front of us and talked through the process, you get a feel for, is this someone you can work with? And I think that's really important.
I think the question for me is more, is this a person you can disagree with and
Yeah. Yeah.
still
Can
work
you
together?
disagree and still walk away angry, I guess, right?
Right. Are you gonna be able to talk through your disagreements without it becoming a collaboration ending or friendship ending
Right.
argument? And you know what? Now that you say that, I never thought about word count before. We've never discussed, I mean, we were so
Yeah.
50-50 on both of these, I think. We've never actually counted words, but would you recommend that authors have word count expectations in their contracts?
I actually, even though I never have, and it never really came up before, I think it's important because, for example, in the case with the journalist who had never written long form
Yeah,
before, that was a thing I didn't even think about.
yeah,
And again, now the contract we got from the publisher, the contract we both co-signed together, was an agreed upon word rate. I
yeah,
was, because I'd done books before, I was the one who took all of her stuff and put it all together, and then was the main contact with our developmental editor and then the editors that they assigned us. But and that's when I got her stuff, I'm like, I gotta do.
yeah.
And so, but again, I think it's important to understand what that was. And I think we talked about it along the way, right? We knew it was going to be longer than Lover's Moon.
Mhm.
Weren't sure how much long. There was a certain point where it looked like it was going to be 100,000 words, but we ended up
Yeah,
cutting some stuff.
yeah,
And I think we landed in a where I feel like when I hold, I mean, this is a nice thick book. Like, this
it
is like,
really
when
is.
I hold Hex in the City, I was like, well, this is a nice hefty piece of work here. I can't believe we did it. But yeah, so that was an interesting thing. But word count is an interesting thing that should be discussed,
Yeah.
or even a range or something, because so if I'm writing 20%, like for example, let's say I'd asked you to write Gail's point of view chapters, but Gail's point of view chapters were only going to be 20%,
Right,
right? That's a different thing, but this was roughly 50-50.
right.
And again, I did have to count when I sent the manuscript off to Sarah and to Scott, right? With the audio, the narrators, right?
Yeah.
Who did the duet narration. Yeah, I had to, and I could probably get the word count because obviously when they charge for that, there's a word count, but it's roughly the same. I didn't see
Yeah.
any huge discrepancies, right?
Yeah, my instinct is it's the same. And in addition to that, we both contributed lines and even entire chapters to each other's
Yes.
not I'm sorry, lines and paragraphs to each other's chapters. There was a lot of that going on because it's frequently I would say, I don't know how to describe this or something
Yes.
like that. And you would add in the paragraph there. So I think by the end of it, it sure feels 50-50. I'd really be curious to know.
Yeah, we should do the count, but
Yeah.
it roughly is 50-50. Because yeah, I remember very specifically. So oftentimes when I'm writing and I need research, I stop, I go on Google, I look it up, I insert the details. Because I had you there and I knew several of your areas of strength, I just put square bracket, Julie, could you insert a detail about this here, please?
Yes.
Thanks. And then I just keep writing. And
Yeah.
so I did lean on you a lot in those moments because I was like, okay, no, Julie's got this. She's got
Yeah.
my back here, right?
And I would do that with the fight scenes.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Mark, put a fight scene here.
But even, I mean, there's a wolf point of view, which is kind of rare for this series because Michael
Yeah.
doesn't really have knowledge of the wolf. So that was an interesting scene, and you, I mean, I wrote the wolf point of views, and you wrote Gale point of views, but you took us like it was like 2 or 3 paragraph section of the wolf's perspective just at the very end as we were sort of last drafting it before I went to the editor. And you wrote this magnificent, I don't even know, maybe it was after we got it back from the editor, but it was this magnificent thing because you said, no, we need this. And you described the vision. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if I can write that. And then you said, well, here. And then you sent it to me. I went, oh my God, it's perfect. It was just like, it was just so powerful. And then even like the last scene, I remember we talked about it and we joked about it and we described it and stuff. And then when you, even though I knew what was coming, when you wrote it, I was like cheering, going, yes, that's awesome.
Those last chapters are, Mark, they are my favorites, where they're the 2 blended chapters. Oh my God, I love them. I love them. They're so good.
So
I guess I can't. I was about to say what part, but I can't say it now.
yeah, I know you can't. We don't want to give any spoilers here. But a less than spoiler here is you apparently had so much fun writing in this universe with me that you are going to continue to write your own spin-off series in the same universe, following some of the characters that you've already played with.
Yes, I am. A trilogy, no less.
A
And I am
trilogy.
so excited.
And you don't have to worry about me not plotting because you already have the whole 3 books plotted out already. Like you came back from a writers' conference with that energy that you'd always send me when I'm in bed and I'm getting a text and I'm like, what's that? I was like, what's that? Oh, she's getting into writing mode. Can you tell?
I know. There was when I was at that conference, I think I sent you like 25 texts in a row. And this is going to happen. And this and this and this. And I'm sure that's when you went, I'm going to go ahead and turn my phone off now. Yeah, well, we work very differently. So yes, I do already know what's coming. And actually, I'm not even sure I should say the titles of them because
you don't want to say the titles of them because that would give some stuff away. But now I can say, so here's the other thing. So you have these books and we do have one of them up for pre-order already, which is
but before
something
that,
you never do.
Never.
But what I did is often before I finish writing the book, I reach out to my cover designer. I have like a whiteboard right there, and I wrote, "Oh, only monsters in the building." That's the name of the next book. No idea what it's going to be about. I think I know what it's going to be about, but here you go. Hey, Juan, send me send me a cover with this on it, and then a couple of iterations back, and bam, I've got the pre-order up, and it's like, yay, it comes out next year. I better write it, and I don't have you this time, right? I got lazy the last 2 books.
I have complete faith in you because this is how you work. And it is incredible to me. Absolutely incredible and admirable. And I wish I was more like that because I wouldn't let you say anything about the direction that I'm going in until I got the whole plot out and I went, okay, now we can talk about it.
Yeah.
But you are just, as much as we joke about how different we are, it's so inspiring to me and it's so invigorating to just see you just jump in like that. And all you know is you vaguely know where Michael's going to go in the next book and you have this great title And you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I sit there and go like, you can't do it. You don't have a plan. And you just do. And it's so cool. And it's rubbed off a tiny bit, not a lot.
Well, yeah, because we have this pre-order up and you haven't written it yet, and I'm so proud of you. So I do have a plan. Here's the thing: the last 2 words of the book are going to be the end. That I know that 100%.
Well, I'm not sure you want to, box yourself in like that, Mark. Uh-oh, did you freeze on me? You sure did. Oh, there.
That's
Now you're
okay.
back.
It's probably just Wi-Fi issues, but that's probably the universe saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
you guys have been at this for more than an hour. We probably should
As always.
get back to reality." Thank you guys for the comments and the questions. Julie, thanks for trusting me despite the strangeness and the way that I sometimes do scary things like writing into the dark.
And thank you for trusting me with this series and these characters that you love so much. It's just, God, it's the greatest honor, Mark. Plus, we had a
Awesome.
blast.
We did have a blast. Alrighty, well, have a wonderful night.
You too.